Let's welcome in the Democratic candidate for governor, John Gregg. John, thanks so much for being here this morning. Great to see you as always.
Great to be here, Jason.
Let's start with the crisis right now in part of the state. Hundreds of people dealing with lead contamination up in East Chicago. You spent some time there this week. What went wrong, and if you were governor, what would you do right now to fix it?
You know, I want to quote from the minister that was one of the first ones to reach out to us, Bishop Tavis Grant, said, let's not worry about fixing the blame, but let's fix the problem. So you've got children. Some children have tested high with lead in their blood. Some haven't. What I would do as governor, and if I have the opportunity to serve, I imagine a lot of it's going to fall to the federal government, but what I would do is make sure that I want to be up there and let these Hoosiers know that they're not forgotten. And I also would want to make sure that we had someone up there that was keeping me in touch with what was going on a daily basis, and that we worked with our federal representatives, we worked with the EPA and HUD and these agencies to make sure they didn't fall through the cracks. This is a real serious problem.
Closer to home here in Indianapolis, it has been another violent summer. You recently rolled out a 7-point safety plan. What's the biggest threat to safety facing Hoosier families both here in Indianapolis and all across the state right now, and what can we do to fix it?
Well, you know, I hear the mayor of Indianapolis talk about poverty and low-wage paying jobs, and all of those are tied in. The one thing I think we need to do to address our public safety problem in Indiana is to admit we've got a drug problem in the state. It's the legal drugs, the opioids that have been prescribed and become addictive, and it's the illegal drugs, the heroin and the meth. And we've got a problem, and we need to deal with it. We cannot build enough prisons to build our way out of it. We've got a high recidivism rate, and we need to realize that there are two types of people, and this is what our program talks about. It talks about community policing. It talks about searching and seeking federal funds to help us implement these things. It talks about spending more money for state police so that our state police have competitive salaries, that they've got a helicopter that actually flies. But it also means that everybody that deals with this drug problem, it's a health problem and it's a law enforcement problem. We make sure the state police are well funded. We also make sure that they're working in conjunction with our local law enforcement. Then we approach the medical side of it. Every dollar spent in rehabilitation saves $4 in public health and saves $7 in our criminal justice system.
Let's talk about the race for governor right now. It's September. Hard to believe that Election Day is almost here already. Just a couple months left to go. Cook Political Report, when Governor Pence got out of the race, shifted this from leans Republican to toss-up. Monmouth University late last month with a new poll with Eric Holcomb in it, giving him a 1-point lead within the margin of error. Are you surprised that those polls show that this race is this close, this late in the ballgame right now?
Well, you know, 4 years ago it was the closest race in Indiana history in over 50 years. I don't deal with the polls and the pundits. We know where we are in this race. We just challenge Hoosiers to continually look beyond the party label. I'm a former president at Vincennes University. I've dealt with large, complex bureaucracies. I'm a former Speaker of the House going back many years ago under Bob Orr, Evan Bayh, and Frank O'Bannon. I've won a national award for bipartisan cooperation that I shared actually with Brian Bosma, the current Speaker of the House. I've been involved in small business, so we just challenge voters to look at our 11 white papers that we've got out there. We've got more to come. Look at our campaign of substance. Look beyond the party label at what we're talking about and what we are trying to engage Hoosiers to do. And I think you'll realize as this closes, we're going to stay focused. We're running like we're behind, and we're going to keep talking about the issues Hoosiers want to hear about, and we're going to win.
A final question for you. We are scheduled to have Eric Holcomb on next week. We'll give him the same opportunity to do this. In 30 seconds or less, the biggest issue facing Hoosiers right now, why are you the person to address it, and why should an undecided voter vote for you?
Absolutely. I think it's because of what I just said. It's about my experience, but there's a difference. I'm running for governor because I want to serve the citizens of Indiana. There's a difference about someone wanting to serve and someone wanting to be governor. My opponent has run for 3 statewide offices in 4 months. He started out running for the U.S. Senate, and after he was finishing 3rd, he's now running for governor. This isn't a consolation prize for me. This is a job to be the CEO of a place we call the state of Indiana. It's our home, and it's got 6.5 million shareholders and a $30 billion budget. We need someone that's focused on being governor and wants to serve as governor, and that's me.
John Gregg, we appreciate your time. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Great.
Welcome back to Indianapolis this week as we turn our attention to the nation's capital. Congress set to return to work Tuesday after a long summer break. And there are pressing issues waiting for them, including a new fight against opioid abuse and money to stop the spread of the Zika virus. And it comes with all the attention turning to the race for the White House. We begin with our State House reporter Katie Hines with Republican Congresswoman Susan Brooks.
We've heard a lot about addiction. Will that be a priority in the next congressional session? What else do you see as your focus?
Well, it will be a priority of mine. We got a huge bill passed and signed into law in July. However, that was a big first step, but we have to keep attention nationally on this problem. Secondly, an issue that I'm very focused on is our biodefense efforts in the country and whether or not we are prepared and adequately prepared for things like Zika, things like Ebola, which we experienced within the last couple of years. What other type of could be a possible bioterror attack might we have in this country, and are we prepared or are we not prepared for those types of attacks? I quite frankly don't think we're prepared. I think we have a lot of work to do in the biodefense area, and so I'm going to be very focused on that.
I know you mentioned Donald Trump's immigration plan. Based on his rhetoric throughout the course of this campaign, is there a risk with the tone that he's used?
Yes, I would say, and I think we've seen a shift in that, and I think we're continuing to see a shift as he has changed his campaign people running his campaign. I think we are beginning to see and are seeing more discipline. I have not always liked the rhetoric. I've been opposed to some of the rhetoric that he's used in the campaign, but I do believe that his message in many ways has resonated with more Americans than we've seen in a very long time. And so, but with respect to immigration, I've always said ever since I've been elected, immigration reform is necessary. We have to start with keeping our country safe. We want to make sure we're a competitive America, and a competitive America means making sure people are being put to work and being kept that people are working, whether it's the high-tech workers, whether it is the lower agricultural workers, lower skilled agricultural workers. We need workers, but we need an immigration system that works. Right now, our immigration system is very broken. It doesn't work. We also aren't even enforcing the laws that are on the books. So it's a very complex problem. There are lots of things that we need to fix. I'm very committed to working on immigration. We've got to secure the border, keep the border secure, but then we've got to figure out what makes our country most competitive economically, and we're a very open country, but we also are a country of laws, and people need to follow the law.
What do you make of the latest revelation on Hillary Clinton's emails that have come out?
Well, that is incredibly disturbing. It is disturbing in large part. There's a whole section in the Benghazi report on the lack of compliance by the Obama administration. We had to fight tooth and nail to get what we did get. And it was a lot of new information. And of course, they continue to share with us that they were providing us everything and that they were giving us everything that the State Department had. And so for the FBI to now uncover that, in fact, the State Department did not have everything, and that the Benghazi Committee did not have everything for our analysis or to include in our report, or for us to ask questions. That's why emails are important. When we interview those 120 plus witnesses, we use emails and other correspondence to ask them questions about it. So we were not able to ask witnesses questions from emails that are now coming out. So really, there was a lot of obstruction in the investigation by a large number of officials. That's in our report, but this shows either further obstruction, and I think obstruction by the Hillary Clinton and her top staff, because obviously she wasn't, there were a number of people involved in the email review, in going through all of those emails, from her lawyers to her top officials, and they clearly did not produce all that we believe they should have under the law.
Joining us now is Congressman Andre Carson of Indianapolis. Welcome to the program.
What an honor.
You are a friend of Hillary Clinton. Does she need to drop this Clinton Foundation, like today?
She will drop it. She has stated that she will drop it. I think that
after the election if she becomes elected?
After the election, once she becomes elected, I think that's reasonable of her. I think that they're going through some troubling times, but it's a great foundation. They do a lot of great work internationally in terms of addressing global education, global poverty, economic needs. Unfortunately, there have been a few political hiccups.
Drip, drip, drip on the emails. When will that stop?
Hopefully it will stop now, but as we've seen, there are more emails that are coming out in terms of donors making requests for passports.
Does that trouble you at all?
Well, I think whenever you have folks who give to you, oftentimes they have expectations. And some of the expectations are reasonable, and some of them are unreasonable. And so that's why a lot of elected officials don't like doing what's called call time, where they're making calls, they're dialing for dollars, because we're human beings and people have expectations after they give to you repeatedly.
If Mrs. Clinton wins the White House, that's an if. If she reaches out to you, her friend from Indiana, will you take on a cabinet position for HUD maybe, or Secretary of Transportation?
You know, I'm in my lane right now. Who knows what the future may hold, but I'm enjoying my time on transportation and especially intelligence.
So is that possible if she were to call? Would you serve her president?
I won't close the door, but I'm having fun right now. I love what I do in Congress, and if it's meant to be, we'll see what happens.
Let me ask you about the issue of coming to Congress after the Labor Day recess. What will be the priority there on Capitol Hill for you?
Well, I hope that we can address the funding for the 12 spending bills that we normally vote on. It looks like we're going to do a continuing resolution, which is temporary. That's no way to run a government.
So no government shutdowns?
No government shutdowns. Hopefully. We can't afford it. It's an election year. Politically, we can't afford it. Hopefully, we'll be able to address Zika. We've yet to address Zika. There have been over 29 cases.
Why can't we address this?
I think a lot of my Republican buddies want to address it, but they're afraid to allot the money. The administration is calling for $1 billion to address Zika.
That is a lot of money.
It is a lot of money, and it's a political hot potato with so many marginal districts. Some of my friends have marginal districts. They want to address it. Republican leadership says no, so here we are.
You said on the House Intelligence Committee, you can never talk about what you talk about the briefings, but we've heard that the major ISIS leader has been killed. On the issue of ISIS, are we winning that war?
I think we are. I think
because
the greater
we get so
war,
many different reports, but are we actually winning that war?
We are. I think the greater war or the greater jihad, if you want to speak metaphorically, is in the abstract. We're dealing with ideological concerns, which is why I'm a supporter of the countering violent extremism effort, where you have faith leaders, rabbis, imams, pastors, educators, school psychologists, parents, who are basically, if you see something, say something, and creating an incubator and safe spaces to allow those folks who are lured into these terroristic activities, the same way we dealt with cults, so-called cults in the 60s and 70s, is what we're dealing with CVE. But it's a long process. We have to deal with issues of global poverty, indifference, educational concerns, because these groups are meeting those unmet needs. It's still a human inclination, and these groups are capitalizing on our humanity.
Congressman Andre Carson, thank you so much.
An honor.
Thank
you.
Back to Indianapolis this week. Let's talk presidential politics. Donald Trump making headlines this week with his trip to visit face-to-face with the president of Mexico, Enrique Peña Nieto. It came just hours before his major address on immigration, spelling out a 10-point plan, including building a border wall with Mexico. Immigration also a top issue with Governor Mike Pence this week. ABC's Inés de la Cuetera is traveling with Governor Pence for us.
That's right, Rafael. It was all about immigration this week. Pence didn't make it to Mexico, but said he was very pleased with the meeting. He told reporters that the point of the meeting had been for the two men to get to know each other and that specific policy proposals would be discussed later on. Here's what he had to say.
Knowing Donald Trump as I do, I know the focus of this meeting for him was to build a relationship, to look for common ground. I know that he said details will follow, as anyone with any modicum of business and negotiating experience knows, it's important first to establish a relationship, and then you can move on to the tougher issues.
Now, Pence wouldn't explicitly say that Mexico would pay for the wall, but insisted, quote, going into the meeting, both parties were very clear on who would pay for the wall. Rafael.
Inés, thank you so much. It's time for our political insiders. Welcome to what I'm going to call Democracy Couch with Meredith Schneider, the queen of the Twitter universe, Democrat Kip 2, and Republican Marcus Barlow. Let's talk immigration. The State House right now, there is a committee looking at the impact of immigration in Indiana, but now we hear on the national level, we heard Donald Trump with his 10-point plan. How does that jive?
Well, I think the state has separate issues on immigration, and I think nationally, I mean, Donald Trump's visit to Mexico kind of brings this issue to the forefront. It's the issue that won him the primary, and I think it's the issue that can get him into the White House. I mean, the Obama administration has done nothing to curb illegal immigration. It's still a problem. Oh, come on. It's still...
Based on the numbers, Marcus,
Yes.
Mr. Obama among the Latino population is known as the deporter-in-chief. If you didn't know that, that is what they call him.
There are more deportations now than there have been under the prior president.
Because there are more illegal immigrants.
But does this speech help with the conversation in Indiana? I mean, here we are trying to deal with, we do have an undocumented workforce in our state. When you hear Donald Trump and this kind of conversation, does this help that discussion?
Well, really, the state doesn't have a lot to do with fixing the immigration problem. So I think what's happening at the State House is largely theater. And I also think what happened with Donald Trump this week was largely theater. I thought the idea of him going to Mexico and meeting with the Mexican president was probably a smart move on his part. And that meeting in and of itself helped him, I think, a little bit, made him look more reasonable, more presidential. But then he blew it. As soon as it was over, he said they didn't talk about the wall. The Mexican president contradicted that, and so it blew up in his face. It made, I think, the country look bad. And then he gave this speech that caused 3 members of his own team to quit, who were Hispanic outreach. So I think it has been an unmitigated disaster this week for Donald Trump, and I don't know where he goes from here.
What about the governor, Mary Beth? What does the governor's role play in this?
You know, Mike Pence has probably done a pretty good job, as good a job as anybody probably could do, in walking the tightrope and keeping his own dignity while you are with Donald Trump, of all people. But I do think he hurt himself by saying it was an honor to be with him and to stand by him at this speech where he doubled down on deporting 11 million people. You're talking about ripping up families out of their homes. You're talking about billions of dollars to raise a deportation nation army to round up all these people. That is not the decent conservative Christian attitude that Mike Pence has always stood for.
He kind of looked like Leslie Nielsen from Airplane when we saw him on that clip a little bit. You weren't quite sure whether he was just being sarcastic or not.
Yeah, of course, I completely disagree. I think that illegal immigration is a problem. I think that what we're talking about is people that have done something illegally. And I think that it's a little disingenuous for our chief executive to think that you shouldn't do something about people that have done something illegally. And that's something that Donald Trump and Mike Pence have consistently talked about.
Let's shift now to the race for governor. This race is very tight. Here we are after the Labor Day weekend.
I don't think it's that tight.
You don't think it's tight at all?
No. I think it's outside the margin.
So whose polls are you?
No, it's completely tight.
Whose polls are you reading?
I think John Gregg has a 7 to 8 point lead.
Is that the John Gregg poll?
Well, I think,
and Evan Bayh had, I think, a super PAC did a poll that showed it was an 8 point lead. The only independent poll was a Monmouth poll, which is now 3 weeks old, that had a 13 point Republican advantage in the demographics. So it's not.
But that was tight.
But that was neck and neck.
Which completely
Indiana history. But Indiana history in presidential elections is a 6 to 7 point Republican advantage.
So tight or not tight?
53-47.
It's completely tight. And you got to feel bad for John Gregg because he's been running for governor for what, forever? And he still can't lead in a poll. He can't lead in an independent poll. He can only lead in polls he puts out himself or Democrats put out.
I want to split the difference. I think it is completely tight, and then that is good news actually for John Gregg, because normally you would see at this point a pretty solid Republican lead in this state.
So what do they have to do, though? Because people will now start to pay attention. What will shake up this race?
Well, I think John Gregg's going to win. So, and I think Eric has had a problem raising money. He didn't get the cash infusion he thought he was going to get from Mike Pence. He's been struggling to try to match John Gregg, and he's not going to get there. And so I think John Gregg has the advantage and will continue to have the advantage. I think the moneyed people that get in this realize John's been out there and he's been working the entire time. This is the third job.
Yeah,
this is the third job Eric's applied for
Eric
this
Holcomb
year.
has actually been raising a lot of money lately, and I think when the next campaign money comes out, we're going to see that. I think this is bad for John Gregg because Eric Holcomb just came up with his first ad. As his campaign starts, that lead that he has right now is only going to be built on.
What Holcomb needs to do, I don't think it's about money, it's about a reason that you want to be governor. And so far we have not really heard that from Eric Holcomb, other than it makes it sound he wants to repeat Pence administration.
See, the discussion is lively here on Democracy Couch. Thank you so much.